the conversations that we get to have between sessions and when we come in and the text that you give me. Several of you have my phone number, and I enjoy the text. And about 105 of you, we had 74 last night, about 105 of you have asked me, are there going to be any awkwardness that I got to tell my kid a weird conversation? I had to have that conversation with mine last night. Mine came to me, and she was asking me a question, and it was in reference to something that she heard. And so, listen, it gets everybody, so I understand that. But I really enjoyed last night some of you talking to me, and you asked about, how do we have this hard getaway? What do we do? How do we set this up? Where do you recommend that we go? And then I started getting texts and some messages and saying, we scheduled tonight. I'm not going to ask a show of hands because you let me down last night because not enough of you put your peanut butter in the refrigerator. But I was excited when I was coming in. People were saying, hey, we got something booked. And so that's fantastic. I'm glad that you're doing that. And if I could make one recommendation, just sometimes we got to step out of the box. Put your peanut butter in the refrigerator one time and just see, this is a good snack or something. I don't know. Last night we talked a lot about the idea of developing perspective and what perspective is. And we focused on the idea of looking toward our spouse and developing some empathy, developing some understanding of who our spouse is. How did they arrive to this point that they're able to think this way, to feel this way, to respond this way? Tonight, I want to reverse that, and I want to look introspectively a little bit. How did we develop this point of view? How did we develop this mindset? And what is it that occurs within us that makes us feel and think, respond, and react the way we do? I want to tell you something about the idea of your response and your reaction. Number one, your reaction, meaning that initial thought or feeling, it's very, very difficult to control. I've told you before, I don't like to be pinched, and I'm not being funny. Don't pinch me. I don't like that. When somebody pinches me, I just feel just a sensation that's nothing like a York peppermint patty. It's a burning sensation. It makes me angry. I really become very, very angry. That's my reaction. My response is now more controllable. That I'm not going to scream and yell, and I'm not going to throw punches, and I'm not going to say bad words, but that initial feeling, I really can't help very much. Now, how do I respond to that? And what is it about us that when something happens that we develop the ability to control, or we have a lack of control? And if we do a little bit of introspection and looking at ourselves and we begin to understand, oh, that's why I do that. That's why I think this way. This is why I respond this way. This is why I react this way. Oh, this makes sense to me. And we don't have to do a deep psychological study. We can just begin thinking about some things that would challenge us as to why am I the way I am. So do this. Are you a person who is more likely to have a fear of success or a fear of failure? Now, don't say both. Think about this, and don't come up with the answer for about 72 hours. I'm serious about that. Think 3 days on this. Think about the illustration I'm about to give you and run it over in your mind over and over and over, because most of the time when we begin with the client who just looks at their marital life, their personal life, life in general, sometimes we lose a little bit of focus of who we are and where we've come from and what makes us who we are. And so these are some things that we do, and what we look at in this first session are some ways that we're able to back up, look at our lives, and look at who we are and what brought us to where we are. Because when I do this introspection, I'm able to look at my life and begin to say, okay, I can have some key markers here that I can identify. This has had a great influence on my life. So are you a person who is fear of success or fear of failure? Now, everybody initially wants to say, I'm both. And you may be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But overwhelmingly, even if it's 51% versus 49%, there's a majority in you that is a driving force of fear of success or fear of failure. And the reason that this is important is because we're trying to identify where is the value and the impact of that value in your life. We try to live a life that we're not as overwhelmed and worried about what other people think. But the truth of it is, we do. We are concerned, sometimes overly concerned, with what are other people thinking about us? What are they saying about us? What do they feel about us? What are they going to say? What are they going to do? That value we place on them, we have to really consider how great should this value be in our lives. I saw this a while back. I wished I had come up with it, but I didn't. But it said this, and I'm going to pass it on to you as it was passed on to me. Never accept criticism from someone you wouldn't seek advice from. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't listen to what other people say. But how much am I going to allow this to impact me? So if somebody says something hurtful to me, if somebody says something that has really hurt my feelings, that has really made me feel bad and down, well, why does it bother me? So if it's someone that I would seek advice from, if this is someone whose opinion has value, if this is someone that what they say means a lot, then I need to listen. And even though it hurt, and even though it was something that made me feel bad, I need to think about, what did that person say? Because I absolutely would go to this person, and I would ask them for advice, and I would ask them for some counsel. But if that's not who this person is, if it's a complete stranger, I may not really want to listen to what they're saying. Or if it's someone that they don't have the character, they don't have the reputation, they don't have the relationship with me, that I wouldn't seek their advice, then their words, I'm going to wash. I'm going to let pass away. I'm going to let them go on. So we're talking about this idea of value, and what does a person say, and how great of a value is it? Now, think about value in the idea of success or failure. What do you have in fear? All right, fear of success. Here's the illustration. You're in high school. It's your junior year. You're going to take the SAT and the ACT. You're going to take these two exams that everyone is going to use to enter into college, either out of state or in state, and this exam is going to determine how intelligent you are. Now, don't argue with me that these tests are rigged and biased and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, if you want to get the promised scholarship, you need this number on the ACT. If you want to get into this school, you have to have this number on the SAT. And so this is going to be an identifier for, are you prepared and are you at the expectation that we need for you to be entered into this university or college or institution of higher learning? So you got the ACT and the SAT, a fear of success. This is the person who looks at that test day and says, oh, great. If I go knock it out of the park, if I go do a great job, this is now the expectation. I've always been a B, C student. I've always been a student that kind of got by. Now if I score big, everybody's going to now expect me to get straight A's. If I get straight A's, everybody's going to expect the next report card to be straight A's. If I do good, then I'm always going to have to be perfect. I'm always going to have to do good. And so that's fear of success. That if I really do something great, now I've demonstrated I truly can do it, and I'm always going to have to do that. That pressure is the value that we place on other people's opinions. And that's a driving force in a person who has a fear of success, because they look at it, they look at their lives, and they say, if I do really well, then the expectation is always going to be, I have to do well. Well, you scored an X on your ACT, then look how great. Now, fear of failure. Fear of failure is the person who looks at this test day and says, what if I bomb? I've always been told I'm intelligent. I've always had great grades. But on this monumental occasion, if I bomb, if I don't do well, and my SAT, ACT is lower than what the expectation, as a matter of fact, my sister got this on the ACT, and everybody says I always made better grade. I don't know if I can handle, because what if I reach for the sky? What if I reach for the goal and I don't make it? Then maybe I'm not as smart as what everybody has always told me that I am. What if I can't achieve the high level that I'm expected to make? What if I can't do that? And now the pressure, now the value is people are going to think different of me than they always have. And so a fear of failure becomes, what happens if I cannot succeed at the level of expectation? People are going to think less of me. Now, that is going to motivate you once you understand, am I a fear of success? This is always going to be a high expectation. A fear of failure, I'm going to be someone that people think is less than what I really am capable of. That's going to be a driving force in your relationship, in your marriage. And the way we connect it back to our marriages is, what does my spouse think of me? Even to the point of, we begin to have this great conference, this great marriage summit, this great time together where we're going to talk about and communicate all of the aspects of our marriage. Well, what if they don't think I'm the greatest spouse? And what if they tell me that there are problems in our marriage? Can I meet this expectation? And now I'm always supposed to write these little cute love notes. I'm always supposed to pick up my t-shirt. I'm always supposed to make the bed. I can't take this. Or what if it is, you see how it impacts us? Now, why is this valuable? If I determine what I am, a fear of success person or a fear of failure person, it gives me an incredible power. Because now, once I come to grips with this, once I begin to understand who I am, I can now use this to be able to prepare myself. Not just in positive thinking and not just in the idea of being able to say, you can do this and turn that frown upside down and lemons and lemonade, but to really understand, this is who I am. I'm a person that becomes anxious, nervous, when I see a great challenge in front of me. And the reason I become anxious or nervous is because I'm afraid of an unrealistic expectation, or I'm concerned of an unrealistic expectation. Now, which way is it going to go and what's going to happen? And so once I begin to understand this is who I am and this is what I begin to be afraid of, think about this. If I have a spouse that I'm able to be vulnerable, if I have a spouse I'm able to communicate, we can talk about, are you a fear of success or are you a fear of failure? Which kind of person are you? Are you more of this? By the way, doesn't matter. There's not one side that's better than the other. I've had clients literally ask me, which one's better? Which one do I want to be? Because that's what I'll become. That's not how it works. You tell them you're busy. You think about this idea of how does this impact my marriage? Because now I'm able to go to this person that I'm vulnerable with and say, here's why I'm anxious. I can begin to identify this is the problem that's happening in our marriage. This is the problem that's happening in my personal life. This is the issue that I'm facing. And I think the reason that it's bothering me is because of X, Y, Z. I can begin to look at this and to understand, recognizing from the point of, am I a fear of success or am I a fear of failure type of person? Now, we talked about this with our group that met on Saturday just by ourselves last time, but I want to expand this a little bit and I want to talk about it for a moment, because once I understand if I am a fear of success or a fear of failure person, I do some more introspection. I look inside a little bit more and I think about what has shaped me to become who I am. What is it that has impacted me that I think, I feel, I respond this way? Who are the top 5 influencers in your life? Now pause for a second. I'm not talking about YouTube right now. I'm not talking about who you like to watch on the cooking channel. I'm not talking about who your favorite. I'm talking about, as you look from 0 to whatever age you are right now, who are the top 5 people who have influenced you that when you have a great moment, like I'm getting ready to take the ACT or the SAT, you want them to know your score or you don't want them to know your score? Who are the people that when you have a great success, you want to share it with? because they've been the greatest influences in your life? Who are the people when you've had a failure you want to run to because you've had the greatest influence on my life? Who are the people who have shaped your decision making more than anybody else? And everybody has 5 people in their life who have been the biggest influencers. Now, who's on this list and who's not on this list? I understand God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. The Godhead is not what we're talking about right now. That's an overarching umbrella that we're going to put above this that ought to have the greatest influence on you. I'm talking about people. For example, when you're going about and you're thinking about something, whose voice do you hear in the back of your head? Who is it that is motivating you? Who is it that is criticizing you? Who is it that you're thinking of? This is what they would say. I've got this big decision to make. I've got this challenge in my life. I've got this problem in my life. Who are the voices that you hear in your life? As a matter of fact, people ask all the time, if I talk to myself, does that mean I'm crazy? No. That doesn't mean you're crazy. If you don't talk to yourself, it may mean you're crazy. Because when you talk to yourself, all you're doing is processing. Someone said, well, when you answer yourself, that's when you're crazy. No. When you answer yourself, that's when you're processing. This is what I'm thinking about. So ask yourself, who is it that I hear their voice? Who is it that I think about? This is what so-and-so would say. So who are those top 5 people in your influence that have really shaped who you are? And then think about this based on those 5. Are they a positive or are they a negative influence? Because now you're going to figure out, why am I a person who has a fear of success? What is it about me that I'm concerned that I have to meet this level of expectation? And how come I developed this fear of what these people are going to think about me? It's not a negative thing, it's a very positive thing. Once I can understand, oh, that influence has really been big in my life. This is a major tributary in my life. Why is it that I'm concerned that if I don't meet this expectation, they'll think less of me? You figure out who your top 5 are, and I guarantee you can make one of those little line charts and you can find those 5 people and why it is that I feel and I respond the way that I do. Are they a positive or are they a negative? The best example I have is a client who came in one time, a female, and she was working through some personal issues in her life, and she did the top 5, and her grandmother was number 1. Tragic situation, her grandmother raised her, but her grandmother really just wasn't a very nice person. Now, she did great things, and she made cookies, and she tucked in at bed at night, and she made sure she was always fed and well clothed, and she said she lived a very, very good life. However, Grandma was never satisfied. Now, birth mom and birth dad had problems with substance abuse and a variety of addictions in their life and were in and out of jail, and they lost custody of this little girl. Grandma stepped in, and she took her. But Grandma had a standard that was extremely high. As a matter of fact, it was impossible. If she brought home an A, why didn't you bring home an A+? If she brought home the captain of the football team, why didn't you bring home a freshman in college? If she brought home, it didn't matter. This is never good enough. Why didn't you? And so she always felt very criticized by Grandma. No matter what she did, Grandma couldn't be pleased. And so when she thinks about her big 5, Grandma was number 1 on the list, but it was a negative. And so now we go back to, am I a person of success or a person of failure? Where is my fear? And we connect it back to Grandma that she had a fear of failure that she began to understand. And it could have been a fear of success, but she understood, I'm never going to reach the expectation. I'm afraid to fail because of what people will think. You see, now I can begin to express to my spouse, the way I responded, here's why. The way I feel, here's why. What I did, here is why. Now, every so often when we talk about this, people challenge us just a little bit, and they say, well, wait a minute, isn't that just making an excuse? I behave the way I behave because of my mom, my dad, my uncle, my cousin, my nephew, my friends, all the... No. I'm not saying, excuse my behavior and allow me to behave however I want. My dad always put his underoos on the floor coming out of the shower, and that's what I do, and you want to blame somebody, blame my dad. No. I'm saying this is our ability to look at it and go, oh, that's why I do that. Done. This is why I feel this way. This is why I respond this way. I tell you why I yell, because this is what I've always seen. I tell you why I always yell, because I don't know how to process my emotions, because I was never taught how to do that. I tell you why it is that I scream, because, you see, now I begin to understand. And so it's not an excuse that says, allow me to continue this behavior. It's helped me to stop this behavior. This is something that always happened to me, and this is how I always responded. And I need to change a behavior that's inappropriate. And based on understanding my expectation and the value that I put on the people in my life and what they think about me, it's impacted the relationship in my marriage. And if I can begin to understand, here are the 5 people who have influenced me the most, and are they positive or are they negative? We're not even talking at this point about replacing those 5 and pulling these people out. We're just talking about understanding these are the 5 people who have really influenced me. We're not going back and blaming them. We're not going back and accusing them. We're understanding ourselves. This is where I come from. I think this goes clear back to Genesis chapter 2, where Adam said, "This is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." I think that's a much deeper verse than what we've often talked about, because at that moment, Adam began to understand who he is and what relationship had come out of him, and what value she has because of where she comes from and her history and the sacrifice of agape love made for her. That now they're beginning to understand this is who we are. And I think about this connection that they have as Adam and Eve, as they walk with God and as they talk with God, that when sin entered in, all of a sudden there's this top influencer in their life, and it's a negative influence. And they've allowed it to impact the positive influence in their life, and it was detrimental to their relationship with each other. As a matter of fact, in 1 Timothy, this is exactly what Paul tells Timothy, why he wants the men to lead and what is happening, because there was a disruption in the pattern that should have been and that was, because all of a sudden I began to doubt myself. I began to doubt my relationship with God. I began to question. I began to feed those thoughts and feelings that I have that are not appropriate and that are negative. And now all of a sudden what happens? Well, God had to give order and design and instruction to mankind of what is supposed to take place. So if we will look at this fear of success, this fear of failure, who are the top 5 influencers in our life, we understand these are the people that shape me and who I have become. Now the question becomes, how much influence do I allow them to continue to have? Are these people that need to stay in my life? Are these people that I need to be careful of how they stay in my life? Number 2, not only do we want to think about the people that influence us, but what is your purpose in life? I understand Ecclesiastes in the very last chapter. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man. This is the all of man. This is the essence of who we are. Our role, our responsibility, our greatest influence is God. I get what you're saying. In this world, as we live in the flesh, as we are in the world but not of the world, as we have to function here, what's your responsibility? Because if you don't have a purpose, then you're not grounded. You're not connected. You're not mature. You're not a person who is an adult. What is your responsibility that specifically is tied to you and you alone are responsible for this? Now again, you're good, God-fearing Christian people, members of the Lord's church mostly, and looking at this and saying, well, it's to fear God and keep His commandment. It's to get myself, my soul, and all I can get with me to go to heaven. We're not talking about that. We're not putting God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, 1, 2, 3 in our people, and we're not putting my role as a New Testament. We're looking at what is my responsibility in this physical world. Now, don't misunderstand me. God needs to come first in your life. Don't misunderstand me. Your ultimate goal is to get to heaven and be faithful to the Lord's church so that we may be able to do that. I get it. But we're talking about what is your responsibility that you have to take care of every day. I get up in the morning and I get out of that bed when I don't want to because this is my responsibility. This is what I do because I have to do this job, because if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And by the way, this purpose is going to change throughout your life. Sometimes it's going to be your children. But what if your children have gone off to college? Now, what is your purpose? You see, a lot of people lose this because they look at it and say, well, my life has been my children. Fine, I'm not going to argue with you. But what now? I have no purpose in life because my child did exactly what God said they should do. They leave and they cleave, and they've created their own family unit, and now I look over to this spouse and I don't know who you are and I don't even particularly like you. Then you need to rethink purpose. What is my responsibility now? What is it that I need to focus on? And recognize I have to have purpose in my life. What is my motivation? What am I passionate about? What excites me? What is it that I look at and say, this is something that I have a goal that I am excited about. I'm looking forward to this. This is something that's going to be great. And there's a difference between responsibility and motivation. But if I don't have something to look forward to, again, I'm not putting heaven in here, the great hope with expectation. That's a different study that we do. I'm talking about in this tangible world, where do I see myself grounded by the people? Where do I see myself connected to the people that I think and I feel and I respond? What is it that I'm responsible for that nobody else is responsible for? This is my job. You may have the same responsibility, but that's your family. This is my family. What is it that motivates me, that makes me look at my life and say, this is what's giving me purpose, existence, quality? I'm motivated. Because if I don't know who I am and who has influenced me, and if I don't know who I am and what my responsibility is, if I don't know who I am and I don't have my passion, well, I don't need to get out of bed. I don't want to get out of bed. I just want to go into the cave and tell God, I and I alone am left, because I'm completely distorted from what I need to be. Elijah understood people and purpose and passion. Now, how does this connect to our marriages? If I understand who has been the top 5 influencers in my life, if I understand the 5 people that have shaped and molded much of my decision making, I'm now able to open up to my spouse and understand better what my spouse is saying. I'm able to hear what they're saying, because a lot of the static, a lot of the clutter, a lot of the chaos that's in my mind, I'm able to let wash away, because now the value and the influence that they have, if it's not a positive influence, if it's not an appropriate influence, if it's a harsh critical influence, I've washed that out. If it's a good influence, I'm really going to connect into that. If it's tied to the Word of God and I make sure this is biblical, now I can hear what my spouse is saying. Now I can understand what my spouse is saying, and I can communicate to my spouse. This is how I feel. I think this is why I've always thought this way. And now I am capable of being able to change. You're going to hear from the world that you can't change. Your personality is your personality. In some ways, that's true. But in most ways, it's not. What is repentance? It's a change in mindset. It's not just a change in action, it's a change in mindset that changes the actions. Do I have the ability to look at myself and say, you know what? I need to quit being so much drama. You know, I think I'm picking a lot of these fights. I never realized that. And now being able to have the security to look at that and say, you know what? I'm embarrassed by this, but I've got to stop. And if me and my spouse can grow together, we can begin to examine our lives, and we can be vulnerable for each other, and we can help each other to say, okay, what do we do to fix this? What do we do to repair this? What do we do to restore this? I don't have my phone on me. But if you would Google simple ways to fix my marriage, you're going to find that all of it's about the same. And communication is going to be number one. But for me to be able to communicate, you have to understand what's the reason. How did I develop this communication style? What is it about me that I am the way that I am? And so I develop a better understanding of self. Let's talk about identity for one more, just one more brief little thought. Sometimes our identity may be a negative aspect. Let's pick on all redheads. Redheads are known for what? Temper. Okay. See, it's a universal. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. Is there a redhead here? I'm not. Oh, I got lots of pointing the fingers and everything. Some people just are not kind, you know. Redheads are known for what? Temper. Okay. So my identity, being a redhead, if somebody is a redhead, my identity, what's your name? Carol. Let's just use Carol as an example. We're all thinking it, okay? I don't know. Carol, I hope you're someone that is not offended by this. If so, we'll pick another name. Let's go with Caroline. It's just too weird, okay? So let's think about if I'm a person who is known for being a hothead. My temper is very quick. My fuse is very short. Sometimes we get used to a dysfunction. But it's my identity. You know how we talk about little kids and we say negative attention is better than no attention at all, and so little Johnny will act up because little Johnny needs attention because he doesn't get enough attention at home, doesn't have enough love, doesn't have enough compassion, there's not enough people hugging him, there's not enough people encouraging him, and so what does he do? He does bad behavior at school, and he gets attention from the principal, and he gets attention from the teacher, and he gets all the attention from the classmates because bad behavior and attention from bad behavior is better than no attention at all. As adults, we do the same thing. Even if what we are known for is something bad. And so I can identify now my identity. And so I'm known for having this temper. But then all of a sudden you say, okay, I'm not going to be temper anymore. I'm going to control this. I'm going to learn to count to 10. I'm going to learn to not be so hot-headed. I'm going to change my behaviors, and you absolutely are able and capable of doing that. But then the fear becomes, who am I? If I'm not the hothead, who am I? If I'm not the big, loud person who's always the center of attention, who am I? You go back to people, purpose, and passion. You begin to identify, am I a fear of success or a fear of failure? And you'll begin to understand, I'm not this hot-headed person. This is not who I want to be. Who am I really? What's the reason I've always let myself get hot-headed? What's the value? What's the payoff for being that hot-headed person? And so many times when people come in and we begin to talk about, I've got these problems in my life, and when we identify the true character, the true nature of the problem, I really don't want to let that go because that's my jawbreaker. That's my everlasting gobstopper. That's my sugar stick. That's my piece of candy, and I don't want to get rid of this because who am I if I'm not this person? Now apply this back to your marriage. If I'm not going to be the hothead, if I'm not going to be the outgoing, overly obnoxious, if I'm not going to be whatever that characteristic is that you recognize now as being negative, who am I? But if you have a spouse who is working on and wanting to have a better marriage, we can discover who we are. I got a soft space to land on. I've got someone who supports me. Somebody who understands. Why? Because I've been able to open up and we've been able to talk about who we are and what's happening in our lives. Now, any questions on that? Let's pause for just a second. Anybody have a question they want to ask about that? Or if you think about it and you want to ask me between sessions, you're more than welcome to do that. I don't see any hands up right now, so we can talk right after this here in a little bit. I want to talk about now the warning signs, and then let's talk about some solutions of how we are able to deal with these are the red flags. So one of the things that I do working with people and when they come into the office and take on clients, I begin to tell them up front, first session, if I see a red flag, I'm going to pause and I'm going to tell you about it. Because this is something I'm identifying and looking at it as objectively as I can. This seems to be something that we need to look at. Sometimes it's nothing, by the way. Sometimes a red flag comes up and I'll say, well, I see a red flag there, and I'll explain what it is that I'm seeing. And after a discussion, we may say, you know what? No, let's just move on because that's really not a red flag. I missed one there. But more often than not, red flags are these little identifiers that we can kind of tick down in this place and come back and look at and recognize this is a sore spot in my life. This is an issue in my life. Let me give you some typical standard aspects of warning signs in my marriage. And what is it that is happening in our marriage that all of a sudden, let me identify this. And the first one is the most dangerous one, and that is contempt for your spouse. When you give the harsh, condemning criticism. When you're the person who has made the standard and expectation that is so great, or the standard and expectation is always changing and there's no consistency, when no one can do enough to be good enough, when you are never satisfied, when you are always belittling, when it feels like you're the only one who gets it and everyone around you is, that is contempt. Contempt is generally defined as having a less than opinion of the other individual. Contempt is when you are going to deride them, when you are going to put them down. They cannot come up for air and they cannot apologize enough. And when you see this in your marriage, look out, because it's the number one predictor of divorce. When your marriage has got to the point that all you are doing is picking out all the flaws and you can't see anything positive, when your criticism is always negative and it's not constructive to build up or to repair, look out, you've got a problem. The number one identifier of divorce. Number two, when you don't feel like you can open up and have an opinion. When you feel like you're not able to express a counterpoint, a contrary thought, something that is different from what your spouse feels, thinks, or says. When you feel like it's unsafe because I'm going to have contempt and harsh criticism, when you feel like it's unsafe because somebody's going to blow their stack if I say that, when you feel like you can't express what you think and what you feel, whether it's right or wrong, when you feel like you can't have a conversation because it's not safe because we're going to have a blow up, it's a red flag. So when you don't feel safe being able to express something, when you don't feel safe being able to be vulnerable because this person's going to mock you, make fun of you, this person's going to use it against you, when you don't feel safe being able to communicate, it's a red flag. When you often fantasize about leaving, now this makes everybody nervous. Because I'm positive 99% of all marriages have come to a point at one time or another that someone has said, I don't know if I should have done this. I don't know if we should have gotten married. We're not talking about that time that occurs and it was a fleeting thought. A lot of times people come into the office and I tell them that I've got to break confidentiality. If you're going to hurt yourself, hurt someone else, or you tell me about a situation where there's something happening that I've got to report, somebody's being hurt or taken advantage of. But we talk about the idea of suicide, and I say there's a great difference between the thoughts of I'm going to take my own life and I wish I could die. There's a difference in that. There's a difference in I would like to go to sleep and not wake up. I wish this world could just evaporate away. There's a difference between that and me saying I am going to kill myself. There's a difference. And so it's not you have to be panicked and say, oh my, our marriage in such a state because one time I thought that maybe I made a mistake. We're talking about, are you fantasizing multiple times a week about how you can get out of this marriage and it's been like this for 6 months, 6 years, 6 decades? You're in trouble. If you're fantasizing and focusing on how can I get out of this, there's a problem. If there's no caress, if there's no hand holding, if there's no hugs, if it's just gone. I've asked her, I've asked him, and they won't. I've went to them and I've been rejected. It's been 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. It is not uncommon for individuals, couples, to come into the office and say, I've not had intimacy with my spouse for 2 years. It's not uncommon at all. And we have to begin looking at, okay, what is causing this disconnect? Why are we not holding hands? Why are we not sharing this time? Why are we not having caress? It doesn't always have to be that coital expectation that we have. It could be just a time where we're just going to sit there on the couch and cuddle. We're just going to snuggle here a little bit. We're just going to spend some time. We're going to have some physical contact, but it doesn't have to lead to that ultimate expression of intimacy. It may just be, we're going to hold hands. We're going to go for a walk. I want to touch you. Nothing wrong with that. Wives who complain, he's always grabbing me when he walks by. Good. He still thinks you're attractive. He still wants to touch you. When he does that, thank him. He'll appreciate it because he wants to reach out and touch. And now, there's an appropriate time and there's not an appropriate time. But if this is gone, well, then what's this saying? If I'm openly criticized in public, this is shameful. Many of us have been guilty of doing this, and many of us have received this. But do you remember as a child, if you had the type of parent or grandparent who would scold you, overly scold you in front of people? I've seen, that's okay. But I've also seen, now that's enough. Now stop it. Now listen to what's going on. And it just goes on. And then all of a sudden you begin to belittle the child. Do you remember how you just felt so small? Because someone, and it just continued on, and they wouldn't stop. And you said, I'm sorry. I don't want to hear I'm sorry. And it just went on and on. And then and then they started bringing up all these things you've done in the past. And they're just laying it on you right here. And there you are as a little 7-year-old, and your little chin starts to quit. Don't you start crying. You're just a big baby just like oh my. Don't do that to your spouse. You want to offer a criticism? You want to tell them, hey, here's something that happened that I wish we wouldn't do. I wish you wouldn't say. I wish this would. You do this in private. We're not going to argue in front of our kids. We're going to do this privately. We're going to have this discussion. But if you're openly getting criticized and you're getting condemned and all these problems that are coming up, it's a red flag because it's inappropriate communication. We're not saying you can't tell someone, I don't like this. We're saying there's a time and there's a place and there's an appropriate way for us to be able to discuss this. How about someone is keeping score? I've already told you about the notebook. I've had lots and lots of people bring in a notebook, and my recommendation is burn it. Why are you keeping score about all mistakes that have been made? This is absolutely ridiculous. Let's look at how we can go back and say, okay, how do we start to repair some of these red flag warnings? For example, if it is contempt and if it's harsh criticism, you can recover from this. If you have all of these, if all 6 of these are in your marriage, you can recover from this. And here's how. You remember earlier we talked about discovering and understanding better who you are and your identity as an individual, who the people are, what the purpose is, what the passion is in your life. Are the people, the influencers, positive or negative, and what is it that they have said, what is it they have done, what are the events and circumstances that they have shaped my life, that my feelings and my responses and my emotions are directly connected to these 5 people more than anybody else in the world. And if you can do that, it's very likely if you're a person who has contempt for your spouse, if you have harsh criticism for your spouse, it is more likely than not that you are able to also understand, I need to talk about the reason I feel the way I feel. So instead of me just word vomiting all over you, instead of me just gushing on all of this negative, what I think about you, because most of the time it's not true. That's the problem with contempt. Contempt is when I feel that you are less than me. Wrong. You are created in the image of God just as I am. And this is irritating me. But let me, who typically expresses my contempt, let me, who typically expresses harsh criticism, let me tell you the reason. And if you can't express the reason in a calm manner, be quiet. Because you're not ready. And you are not able to give that harsh, overwhelming, critical stop. Back up and look at it and say, What is it about this that makes me so upset? What is it about this that is frustrating me? And pretty soon you're going to find out it's really not this, it's that. And here's how it's connected to that. And this is the reason that it bothers me so much. Now, if you can figure out people, purpose, passion, fear of success, fear of failure, if you can figure that out and you can recognize, and if you have the spiritual maturity to be able to say, you know what, I'm about to blow my stack right now, but that's no longer my identity. What is it about this situation? Because I can't be openly criticizing this person, my spouse, who I love, who I've made a vow to, who is the spouse, the parent of my children. Woo. If I can't do that, then I just need to be quiet. But if I can back up, what is it about this situation? What is it about that word? Heard the story of a young man, grew up into a man, and there was a word that if you would call him this word, he would fly off the handle. Any other time, he was a great guy. But if you said this word, he became a monster. One day, because of some thought process, he was able to understand, because the person who used to call him that name was in his top 5. And he realized, when I hear that, when you do this, it reminds me of that. Oh, I see it. So instead of me responding and reacting in an ungodly manner, let me be more godly and start to process and think about, and if I can come to you, my spouse, my cherished loved one, and say, I've had an epiphany. I get it. See, this is what always happened, and this is how it made me feel. And when this takes place, this is what I begin. You see what I'm saying? And they're like, I don't know. I'm afraid I'm being set up right now. Should I say yes? I'm just going to sit here and be quiet. I get it. It's because of that, and it makes me feel, and when I see this, that's why I'm so sorry I've always done this. But I know why now. And I'm really going to try to stop. You see, it's not me blaming, and it's not me excusing. It's me growing and understanding. This is who I am. I don't want to be like this anymore. I don't like this person. I want to, love my neighbor as I love myself. And now all of a sudden, I can be more Christ-like. If I can begin to recognize, let's solve a problem together. If it feels like you can't be safe in sharing what you think, what you feel, what you need, what your thoughts are, if you cannot speak safely, then let's start taking it outside of me and you and this, and let's look at this over here and decide, hey, how can we solve this problem together? Now, this is going to take both of us. But let's figure out what a problem is that's not connected to us. And let's begin to do this. Couples have said, you mean like a puzzle? Maybe. If a 500, 1,000, 6 bajillion, 3-sided 3D puzzle, you can do this without flipping the table over, great. But I'm probably talking about, let's get on the internet and let's Google example fix problems. If you Google example fix problems, you're going to see a list of all of these scenarios, and you can begin to just sit down and say, okay, here's a scenario and here's the problem. How would you solve it? And now we can begin to have a discussion, and you can have these ideas that are coming back. Now listen, this is scary because up until this point, we have got to the point in a marriage that one of us or both of us feels like we are not safe sharing what we think. So we're going to take it outside of our marriage and we're going to talk about a problem over here. And it may even be a marital problem that we don't have, that we've seen other people who commonly have this universal problem. Great, let's discuss it. And so instead of sharing my thoughts and feelings about us, let me share thoughts and feelings about this. Because we don't have an emotional attachment to this. We don't have an insecurity attached to this. And let's work this problem out, and then let's have some success in being able to build these and being able to repair these. And now let's take these new tools that we have, and let's begin to look over here, and very gently let's begin to twist and pull. And let's begin to make some repair. You're fantasizing about leaving? Let's plan something together. If you are always thinking, if you're all about, I'm gone, then you're gone. That's not condoning. It's just telling you, if this is what you're thinking, this is what you're going to do. So instead of fantasizing about what it would be like to get out and to go, think about, let's me and you sit down and talk about where we're going to go. People challenge us on this all the time, and they say, look, we can't afford every weekend to go out somewhere. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I guarantee you within 10 minutes of where we're standing right now, there is a free place that you're able to go and walk. I'm saying within 25 minutes of where we are right now, there's a festival with a bunch of apples on it, and we can go walk around. I'm saying within a 1-hour drive, a day trip, we would be able to go someplace and do something where we're going to plan this enjoyable time together. I had a couple come in. They were having a difficult time in their marriage. They had all 6 of these and about 4 other things. And I literally told them, you're on the brink of divorce in the first session we had, and I don't know if we can get this turned around because both of you are heathens. Both of them had serious and significant problems. When we got down to this about planning something together, they really fought on this. Where are we going to go? Where are we going? I don't want to do this. She loved to travel. She loved cruises. She loved vacations. He wanted to stay close, and he was one of those guys that liked guns, Civil War, and history, and she hated it. I said, why don't you go to the Henry Ford Museum up there in Dearborn, Michigan? He looked at her, and looked back at me, and he said, what's up there? Oh, they got a train, and they've got presidential cars, and they've got about 6 locomotives, and it's this great big Henry Ford Museum. Thomas Edison's shop is up there, and he was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And she said, how far? And I was like, it's like a 6-7 hour trip, maybe 8-hour trip. I said, and there is a river boat that you can go up, and she said, well, that kind of stuff. Listen, it doesn't even have to be that big. But you're telling me that you can't think together and be able to say, here's something that we both could compromise and get a little bit of enjoyment out of? By the way, that couple, they absolutely made it. And they're doing very, very well right now. Now, I don't have nothing but success stories. I've also got couples that it didn't go. And I can tell you why. Because they looked at that and went, pfft. You drain the oil out of your engine, and I tell you, you need to put the plug in. You need to fill it back up with oil. If you don't, your engine's going to blow. Got a 1995 Isuzu Rodeo. The engine's gone. You know why? Because I changed the oil. I didn't put the plug in. I put new oil in. It drained out the bottom, and I drove it. I'm not mechanically inclined. I'm sorry. I can't fix your toaster. But if you don't do what needs to be done, you've not touched 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Go home tonight. Go into your bedroom. Hold hands. Tell each other, I love you. I'm sorry for the way we've been acting. I'm sorry for the way I've been acting. And I want things to get better. And then, for 30 seconds, keep your hands together and stare into each other's eyes. You know what's going to happen? Now, if you're saying nothing, get up and go home right now. You hold hands with that person that you said, better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and health. You hold hands with that person that you are able to live together with for this many days, months, hours, weeks, years, whatever it is. You hold hands and you say, I love you and I'm sorry, and you stare into each other's eyes for 20 seconds. And you know what's going to happen? One of about 5 things. One of them may be, this is awkward. You know why? Because this is awkward. This is weird. When was the last time you stared 30 seconds? It's maniacal. This is weird. Serial killers do this. And people who love each other. Because I'm telling you, marriage is psychological. One of you are logical and one of you psycho. You hold hands. Tell each other, I love you. Receive, I love you. I'm sorry for the way we've been acting. I'm sorry for the way I've been acting. Take ownership that there's an issue here. Take ownership of I'm a part of this problem, and stare at each other's eyes for 30 seconds, and it may become uncomfortable and you may begin to laugh. But don't lose eye contact. Because what happens is a chemical process in the brain that attaches intimacy, and they touch. And all of a sudden, I begin to have a different heart rate. I begin to have a different serotonin, adrenaline. I begin to have a different oxytocin. All these chemicals where we are fearfully and wonderfully made begin to fire, and neurons and paths are literally being dug into my brain that haven't fired and haven't existed for a long time. And I'm starting to get a warm, fuzzy feeling. One of the 5 things that may happen, let me warn you about this. It may bring a very intense, uncomfortable emotion of anger. Because I'm angry. I'm angry that we've allowed this to happen. I'm angry at the hurt that you've created in me. I'm angry at the pain that I've created in you. I'm angry of the hours and the days that have been wasted. I'm angry. And tears will fill up in your eyes, and you will begin to have a tearful response. Don't lose eye contact. If you are the spouse that's holding the hands and you are receiving this, I'm angry, your response is, I love you, not I'm sorry. Not we can fix this. Your response is, I love you, and you let that serotonin, you let that synapses, you let that oxytocin, you let that intimacy connect. I promise. It's going to have an impact. 30 seconds of intensity is going to restore so much, and it's going to expose so much. You say, what do we do after that 30 seconds? I don't know. There's 0 bars, king size, fun size. I don't know, whatever. I mean, you're there. You're in your bed. I mean, whatever. Or it may be, you know what? 30 seconds is up. Want to talk? You know what a lot of my clients say? No, I'm exhausted. 30 seconds of intensity. Stop openly criticizing me in public. Okay? You may not be able to fix or stop the person who is intensely harsh, contemptuous, and critical, but you can take away the power. Do not take criticism from someone you would not seek advice from. That does not mean you're a man, a woman, an island on by themselves. That's not what this is saying. This is saying, you know what? Right now, this person who would ridicule me this way, this person who would put me down this way, I'm not going to give you power anymore. You don't get rent-free headspace anymore. I'm not saying we're going to ignore. I'm just saying all of a sudden, this person says, yeah, my wife could never do something like that. Yeah, my husband couldn't do anything like that. I've told you numerous times, I'm not a mechanic. Do you know how crushing it would be if my wife said in front of you, oh, I'll tell you about Peter Ray. He's the most pitiful man I ever seen. My dad could fix a car, but my husband, he can barely drive one. That hurt a little bit, I'm going to tell you. I can't handle that. But if she said that, and by the way, she would never do that. But if she said that, you know what my answer would be? I'm really not a mechanic. What if I am a great mechanic? What if I'm ASC LMNOP certified and I am a great mechanic? And she says, oh, I wish my husband was a mechanic like that. Yeah, I'm probably not the best. No more power. No more boo-hoo. I'm not doing that. I'm going to control my response. Why? Because I know the people in my life, I know the purpose in my life, I know the passion in my life, and you're not connected to that. And I pray to God that we can be connected once again. But until we are, I'm not letting you devalue me anymore. I would not, at this point right now, maybe later when we see things that have changed, but right now, I would not let you have this kind of power over me. I'm not letting you have that. I'm taking away that power. It's very, very hard to do. Someone is keeping score very quickly. Start keeping the real score. Which means this. When your spouse does something that you appreciate, tell them. When your spouse does something that you found enjoyable, tell them. When your spouse does something that made you feel good, tell them. When your spouse does something that you feel like nobody else in the world can do that, tell them. When your spouse has something benefit, tell them. You let them know the benefit. You let them know. And you start keeping track of, look at all the good things you've done for me. Start keeping score on what matters. Okay, I'm not this person and I did this mistake. Please don't hold it against me the rest of my life. You've seen the cat poster with the spaghetti bowl on top of the kitten's head and says, nobody remembers when I do something right. Don't be the cat with spaghetti bowl on their head. Don't be the person who makes your spouse feel like a spaghetti cat. But instead, you be the person who is saying, you know what? There have been mistakes, but we can work on that. But let me tell you about your great triumphs. Let me tell you about the great thing that you've done for. Let me tell you about how much I appreciate. If I could begin to keep those scores, the impact it would make on our marriages and how great it is. Look, it's 6 after 7, so we're going to come back at 7. Let's see, let me show you how good I am at math. We're going to come back at 7:15, and that's going to be our start. So we just got to shorten. We've got 9 minutes now, so take a restroom break, get something to drink. If you want to pass me a question that you said I didn't want to ask in front of everybody, if you want to talk about something, we can do that. But let's take a break real quick, and then we'll come back.